Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to tonight's event. I'm super excited about it. I've been working with the programs team to get this all set up, and I'm super excited that you can all join us. This is a topic that I think is near and dear to many of our hearts. And so I'm super, again, just super excited that we can have the topic, and this is something that we really feel is a value for AWT. So I want to thank Tai for being here and Apex for sponsoring. If you could move to the next sponsorship slide. Thank you. I want to thank all of our other sponsors. Cirrus Logic, Apex System has been a sponsor for years now, and they're tonight's sponsor as well. Digital Turbine, PIMCO, Sana, Charles Schwab, another sponsor we've had for multiple years. Axiom, Clear Data, Revel IT, FDM Group, and ShipStation. So much of what we do is made possible by our sponsors, and we hope that you get a lot of value out of those relationships as well. Again, tonight is sponsors is Apex Systems, and I'm going to turn it over to Shay to introduce folks from Apex.
Hey everyone, welcome tonight. Thank you so much for coming. I'm Shay, I'm our programs director for AWT, but in the daytime, I work at Apex Systems, and I have the pleasure of introducing my boss, Aaron Key, who's going to tell you a little bit about our company. So Aaron, you want to take it away?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Shay. Hi, everyone. I'm Aaron Key. I'm the executive managing director of our Austin location, one of 72 across the company. I started with Apex about 5 years ago as an account manager in outside sales, similar to what Shay's role is right now, and took over the office in January of 2019. I wish one thing I would have come to Apex much sooner, as some of my fellow counterparts have, but I love my time here so far. Of our 72 locations, we have hundreds of openings inside our office and outside our office as well, as far as what we do with IT staffing and IT services. So anything in regards to staff augmentation or project-based work. If you're interested in learning more about Apex Systems, the openings that we have internally as account management or recruiters, or externally, please reach out to myself, Shay, Taryn, anyone from Apex on this call. Happy to be here. Thank y'all very much.
Awesome. Thank you, Aaron. I appreciate it. So we are going to jump into our next section, which is our networking roulette. For those of you in the room, everyone, and we are ready to go into our program for this evening. Denise, if you don't mind hitting the next slide. So tonight, our moderator is Joy Wiggins, who is a robust AWT volunteer, but is also a speaker, author, scholar, and facilitator who promotes racial and gender justice through compassion and open dialogue to ignite equitable, empowering, and transformative practices. Joy's work examines the way that social realities influence our day-to-day communications across cultures. Her work led to the creation of a program titled Global Peaceful Paths, which encourages participants to self-reflect before interacting with others and the world at large. Joy will be speaking with Tai Dotson this evening, who is an accomplished diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging leader with experience building DEIB programs from the ground up. She has led workshops, presented strategy, and consulted on high-level business initiatives on topics such as navigating difficult DEIB-related conversations, integrating DEIB into day-to-day activity, microaggressions, emotional IQ, and managing diverse workforces. Her unique brand of down-to-earth, tangible solutions allows for even the most complex or elusive concepts to be addressed within an organizational strategy that propels the DEIB initiatives to success. Based on the belief that no one should have to check who they truly are at the door in order to work effectively and collaboratively, Tai focuses on developing an organizational strategy that includes change management around organizational DEIB goals, developing internal training and resources, creating content for programs and marketing initiatives, as well as developing a tactical focus on measuring the impact of programming and initiatives. She is inspired by those who fearlessly advocate for marginalized groups and take purposeful action in using their voice to drive change. She is ignited by a radical kindness, empathy, and the opportunity to make a positive impact on a company's culture. And I'm going to hand it off to you gals. Joy?
Hi, and Tai, thank you so much. I love this radical kindness too, so I'm super excited to hear that. Yes, would you like to?
Yeah, let me get my screen share going on here.
I was just excited just to hear all the things that you do. This is amazing.
Yeah, that hearing it right out loud is a little wild. Um, but thank you. Yeah. So I just wanted to really take the time today to break down and challenge some of the more traditional views that that you tend to hear, especially over the last 60 years since we've been having this conversation around diversity and inclusion. Started off with affirmative action, and how we've progressed thus far. So trying to pull it into sort of the new millennium to prepare us for the future. So you want me to dive right in, or okay, I'll go ahead.
Yeah, sure.
All right. So the things that we're going to look at today is equity and inclusion over just diversity. Then we'll talk a little bit about when it's necessary to discuss diversity. We'll also look at the harm of bringing people into environments that are inequitable or not inclusive. We'll also talk a little bit about performative DEIB versus actually doing the work, and then we'll open it up for some Q&A. So there's not a ton of slides, so definitely if you guys want to interact in the chat while we're going through this, that's perfectly fine. So in the conversation around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, oftentimes when we're talking about it, we start the conversation at diversity, and it doesn't always really progress beyond that, which is why I really like to highlight the equity and inclusion specifically. So when we look at things like equity, the difference between that and something like equality, which is a big word that we heard in the 90s and the early 2000s, is that equity really seeks to promote the fairness and justice through treating people differently based on their needs, as opposed to just treating everybody the same, right? So I know that in the 80s and the 90s, there was this really big push for people to be colorblind and let's treat everybody the same. And that was equality. But what we learned from that is that that doesn't allow everyone to get what they need, right? And so there's this really great image out there. The colors were off, so I didn't add it into the slide, but there's a really great image out there on the internet, and it uses bicycles as an example. So in the first panel, you'll see different people, a really, really tall person and sort of average height, someone in a wheelchair, and then I think a child. And everybody is given the same bike, right? That's the equality. Everybody has a bike, right? Everybody's happy now. But not everybody can fit that bike. Not everybody can ride that bike. It's not accessible to everyone. So it's really not an equitable solution. And then in the second panel, you see everyone has the bike that they need. So the tall person has a larger bike, the average person, has a regular size bike, the child has theirs, and then there's a wheelchair accessible bike for the other person in the panel. And understanding the difference between equity and equality is really one of the first steps. What we're really seeking to do as we move forward in talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion is making sure that we're not just giving everyone the same thing, but that we're really taking a look at the populations that we serve, whether that be clients, customers, employees, and that we're making sure that they each have what they need to succeed, certainly within reason, for the business. And then from there, we look at inclusion, which is, as it states, it's achieved when different groups who may have different backgrounds are welcomed, accepted, and treated equitably, both culturally and socially. So that's a really big concept as well, because it's not just getting a bunch of diverse people in the door. It's, again, making sure that they equitably have what they need to succeed, and then also making sure that no matter who they are included in the environment, both culturally and socially. So that may mean, if you have a population of people that, maybe they need a prayer room, as an example. And if you don't have somewhere quiet for them to go and to do that, that's something that you may need to look into. Not everyone is going to take advantage of that, but for the folks who do, it's available. So just thinking about things like that.
Ask you a quick question too. If let's
Yeah.
say this idea of the prayer room. So let's say how would a company go about finding out more about their employees so that they could include those types of things, and that they would engender more of that inclusive culture. What are some things that you've seen that people have done, or organizations that have done, to make sure that there's that inclusion factor?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have actually found that that is one of the things that is typically best tackled at sort of the manager level. So if you are somebody who runs a team, that sort of functionally would fall on you. Get to know the people on your team, right? If you are going out to happy hour and you're getting to know the folks on your team, and you find out that somebody, as an example, is Muslim, it's not necessarily out of the question to say, I didn't know that, are you somebody who is practicing? Do you need some place, do you have space at work to do that? Is that something that we need to look into for you? They may say no, but they may also say yes, that maybe they haven't brought it up because they didn't feel comfortable. But again, that's where, if you know a little bit, about the people on your team, you say, oh, well, I didn't know that. It's just like with, a maternity room. If you didn't know that somebody needed that, if you don't ask, you're never going to find out. So I would say definitely, if you are somebody who has a team, take the time to get to know your people. That was a great question.
Great, thank you.
The next quote I really just like to put out there, because I think that it really sort of explains out the journey of what we're trying to do here. So again, diversity is really sort of the entry level. That's a fact. The world is a diverse place. That's not news to anyone. Equity is absolutely a process. It's examining your organization. It's examining, if you're talking about your personal groups, examining everything around you to say, what can we do to make this more equitable? What processes do we need to evolve? Inclusion then is going to become a behavior. Once you start looking at things equitably, that inclusion is going to start to become a behavior, because you're going to have that curiosity to look around you and say, this doesn't feel exactly right. I need to figure out what we can do to fix this, or to evolve this particular process. And then really the end goal, so to speak, would be the belonging, right? If you're doing the rest of these things, the goal that we're all trying to work towards is to have workplaces and environments that everyone feels like they belong, just sort of as they come in the door. The thing that I really implore people to remember and to think about is that DEIB is not just a metric. And that's one of the reasons why I try to shy away from diversity conversations, because when you talk about diversity, you end up having the conversation in a very metric based way. And not that that's not important, but that shouldn't be the focus. It shouldn't be, I need X number of this kind of person in my organization. So I really want to challenge everybody to kind of move away from that thought process.
Someone also, Denise, said that diversity is being invited to the party, but inclusion is being asked to dance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Renee Myers over at Netflix. She's an icon.
Choosing the music.
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely love that one, actually. I have that like plastered, in my office. When I was going into the office, I had it hung up. So let's get into the next slide. So I say, obviously, and this kind of goes, against what I just said, right? I say don't focus on diversity, but I do want to point out that there are times where it is pertinent and necessary to discuss diversity. And so that would specifically be times where you're talking about compliance. We all, if your business is based in the United States, there are equal employment opportunity minimums that you do have to meet. Those are things that you legally have to pay attention to. It is absolutely appropriate to have a conversation around, demographics or diversity as you're talking about compliance issues. If you're talking about who is going to how many people you have doing what, where, what is your office, makeup, there's a time and a place for it, but there is a difference between compliance and cultural evolution. And so I think that that's something that everyone needs to be cognizant of as you're having the conversations. Are we talking about compliance, or are we talking about the culture of our organization? So if you find yourself overly concerned with things like, optics, how are our clients going to look at this? How are our customers going to look at this? If you are, saying, oh, well, we need to move visibly diverse employees into more prominent roles within our organization so that we can show that we're being, diverse and inclusive. That is where I would say you're moving a little bit more into what I would call the wrong way to handle it. Hiring diverse folks is certainly not wrong, but the reason that you're doing it is something that you want to be cognizant of. When we're talking about something like cultural evolution, we really want to focus on what voices or perspectives you may be missing from a room. I had a conversation with somebody once who said, my office has the opposite problem of a lot of other offices. I have a whole bunch of women in my office. I don't have any men. And he was like, is it appropriate for me to say I need to hire more men? Well, of course it is. Your office is not gender diverse, at least as far as you know, right? So it's okay to look around and say, I have a lot of female presenting voices. I need to add some other voices, whether those be non-binary folks, whether they be, male presenting folks, whatever it is. It's okay to ask that question and to say, okay, how do I go about solving that? You also want to, go ahead.
Oh, I just saw a question that somebody sent to me, and they said that that they heard that if you align work with a person's passion, that it will result in higher diversity, and they wanted to know your thoughts on that. I thought
if you align work with a person's
passions, that it will result in higher diversity. So maybe they can.
I think, yeah, I would be interested in hearing a little bit more about that. I think that may be a bit more anecdotal. Certainly, if we all love what we do,
right,
that's a good thing, and we'll stay longer and we'll want to invite people in. I don't know that that's off base.
Yeah, I wonder if that's also maybe that's that sense of belonging. And
Yes.
if somebody, to me, if you are aligning the work with someone's passion, that's that sense of belonging. And if they feel like they belong, then perhaps they'll stay. But of course, that's okay for anybody, really. So I wonder, yeah, and some other things that somebody else had asked, is there other examples of ways that managers can help their employees feel included, like along the lines of the prayer in the mother's room? And I think that's that cultural evolution that you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of, just sort of tangible ideas, I mean, certainly, and I'm going to say this, and I hate to be this person, but there's actually a lot of really good suggestions on Google. But some industry standard things that I've seen is focusing on equitable practices. So again, if you run a team, or if you have the ability to make some changes, instead of having people volunteer to take things on, set up a rotating system, right? So let's say you have a weekly meeting and there's maybe the same person is typically taking notes and then the same person is typically presenting. Set up a rotation so that you don't lock people into various roles, because those do tend to be oftentimes gendered. And it also tends to be a situation where, for example, men will speak up more, women may not speak up more, and you start pigeonholing people. You can also make sure that when you're having business meetings and you're getting to know everyone, that you're doing that equitably. So don't automatically assume that you're going to do team building at the bar at the end of the week. Not everybody drinks. Not everybody's going to want to go to the golf course. Golf is huge in Austin, and it drives me nuts because I hate going to the golf course. But finding other places to do things, and making those events more equitable and accessible to people. You also might have people who have children. You don't want to assume that they can't do things after hours, because maybe their spouse is fine, is able to compensate for that. But on the flip side, a lot of people are going to want to go home and spend time with their families if they have children. So you want to make sure that as much as you can, you're doing those things during business hours, like lunch times and things, because that's more equitable. So there are things that you can do. It's just going to be what works best for your team.
And I think too, I think about, when I'm done at 5 or whatever, I want to be done.
Yeah.
And I mean, love y'all, but want to be done, And so it's like, I might love my employee or, my coworkers and stuff. But yeah, like for me as a single mom, like
Yeah.
the only way we were talking about this in our breakout room earlier, the only way I'm able to do this is because it's on Zoom. And
Yeah.
everybody got dinner and everything, done. And so I think that's even if you're going to do things like that, now we know that we have Zoom. And if we want to get together and do a little thing like this, we can. Yeah, so that's great. Thank you.
And I was that way before I had kids, and my mom used to always get on me like, you need to, work extra hours and try a little bit harder. And I was like, no, I want to go home and sleep. So you just can't assume, what different people are going to want or what's going to work in their lives, which again goes back to getting to know the people that you work with.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Not yet. Oh, what? We got one. What's a polite way for a person to tell their boss that they don't feel included? That's a good question.
It is. I honestly, I love when people ask me what's a polite way to do anything, because I genuinely don't know that I'm the right person to ask that question. I am very direct. So, and I'll give you an example from my own personal life. At the last company that I worked at, I had to have this exact conversation with my boss, and it was a golf thing again. We got into this situation where every Friday it seemed like, over the course of one summer, it seemed like all of the guys were leaving to go play golf for various business related reasons, but all of the women would end up being left in the office. And whether it was intentional or not is really irrelevant. The impact of what happened there was that the men were out playing golf and that the women were in the office. And so I went to my boss and I was like, hey, I'm not sure if you recognize this. So I guess the nice way that I would say would be, I'm not sure if you recognize this, but I've noticed, and always say I, don't say we all, or I've heard, or I've talked to some people. I have noticed that every Friday for the last several weeks, all of the men in the office leave to go play golf. And all of the women are left in the office. I don't know if that's an oversight. I'm not really sure, what's going on, but it feels as though the men are able to sort of work a half day and then go have fun, and all of the women are having to work until 5. Bringing it up sort of in that way where, hey, this is what I've noticed. This is how it makes me feel. And I just wanted to draw that to your attention, would probably be the nicest way that I could think to put it. For whatever your situation is.
Yeah, agreed. My sister took up golf just so that she could do that, go with the guys and make the business deals. Cause she's like, I better hurry up and learn golf, because if I don't, things are passing me by. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah. I initially said that I would go to the golf outings if I could drive the cart and drink, but that ends up being, I still don't get to talk to anybody that way. So
great. Okay. Thank you.
all right. So yeah, and then just finishing up this slide, you guys kind of see the differences, right? You want to make sure that you're creating an organizational culture where all of the different perspectives that you have on your teams are valued and respected. So what is the harm then, right? We're talking about what we should be doing and why it matters to the business, et cetera, et cetera. What is the harm? So there are loads and loads and loads of articles and stories that you can read of negative experiences for folks from all different types of diverse backgrounds. I think the biggest thing that needs to be understood is that there's a huge difference between intent versus impact of your actions. So the reason that I wanted to start this slide with that is I don't know that any business intends to have, for lack of a better word, a hostile environment for their diverse employees. That's never the intent. It's usually just the impact of actions. However, the problem ends up being, if you focus on diversity, if you say, I need to hire X number of this kind of person so that I can say that my organization is diverse, but you don't work on the equity, the inclusion, and the belonging, then all you've really done is bring diverse individuals into what can be very hostile environments. People will make passive comments. People will be dismissive. People will get overlooked for promotions. People will not get opportunities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of those things affect all of us negatively, right? If you notice that everybody else in your office is getting opportunities that really aren't coming to you, it's going to start to mess with you. If you notice that, you're always being given the more menial tasks, and other people who, for whatever reason are, part of the dominant culture of the company, don't have that same problem. Those are all things that are going to start to mess with you. And they're eventually going to start to affect your job performance, and ultimately, oftentimes people leave. So that's where again, shying away from the diversity conversation, because when you hire diverse candidates simply for the sake of hiring diverse candidates, ultimately, you're really just shooting yourself in the foot. So there was a Gallup poll, which I have here, and I'll let you chime in, Joy. But one of the reasons that workers seek more diverse and inclusive workplaces is because 45% of American workers experience discrimination and or harassment in the prior year. And that's a huge, huge number.
Yeah, I was going to say the diversity hires. And then I remember being like, in the copy room and hearing someone saying, well, they were a diversity hire. And then, what is that? That sets that person up then. And so that's part of that idea of just not focusing on diversity, but that engaging of people want many different types of people to work with. And if the culture includes people and has that whole ethos that's like, wow, how amazing this would be to have all these different people, it would be, that's such a difference.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing that we have to pay attention to is if we're giving the benefit of the doubt, most of the time, the things that are said, those passive comments, people don't always necessarily realize that the things that they're saying or the things that they're doing are offensive. So there's certainly a lot to be said about, having that cultural competence and et cetera. But again, that's all part of the process of creating an equitable and inclusive environment. If you're doing the work internally to say, I'm just going to take the people that we have here, and I'm going to figure out how we can become more inclusive and more equitable, that's the place that you want to start. Because you can't confidently go out and say to diverse populations, I want you to come join this company. Like, we'll take care of you. What do they have to show them that that's the truth?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Absolutely. Where's the proof to that? And I think I'm getting a couple of questions. Some people are asking me about how do we get that survey for our companies? And somebody else asked, what resources do you recommend for fair performance metrics when promoting equity? So it sounds like, I think maybe what folks want to know is, what are these resources that you can actually find out how to be more inclusive with your company? Maybe that's what y'all are asking. What are there certain measures or, tools, kits? I always think of like equity frameworks that, I think that's perhaps what everyone's asking, the resources.
Yeah, absolutely. And to address that, I'm going to disappoint a lot of folks probably. And I'm going to do that in saying, I highly recommend that if you as an organization are going to take the diversity and inclusion of the organization seriously, that you either look at hiring somebody into a position to handle that for your organization, or bring in an outside consultant.
Yes.
The problem with the thing that I've noticed is everybody always asks for, and it makes sense. I understand where it's coming from. Everybody sort of wants this list of what are 6 things that I can do to kickstart this. And the problem is every organization is so different, and every organization is in a different spot with, on this journey, that there isn't really a good one size fits all option. Mm-hmm. So without knowing your organizations, I don't have very much that I can really suggest confidently outside of doing some research and trying to figure out what is going to work for your company. Now, as far as what you can do to find a good consultant, there are tons of especially in the last year, there are tons of DEI consultants out there. And so I recommend, figuring out at least a baseline for your organization of what things you think you're trying to address. Whether that is the diversity numbers. If you look around and say, hey, we don't have, a ton of diversity here, it could be creating better policies. It could be just having somebody come in and do a full assessment. I mean, you need to figure out what your organization is looking for, and then put that out, for a bid. Do an RFP. Just say, hey, this is what I'm looking for. There are diversity boards. There are groups on LinkedIn for diversity professionals. I would say if you can look in your local area, that's always really good to support a local business. But put together a framework of what you think you need, and then ask people for for how they would solve that. And then look, obviously same thing you do with any other RFP, figure out what works for your budget and go that way. But you want to try to find people who are going to put a focus on your organization doing the work, right? So if they're heavily metrics based and they don't really have a qualitative measure, that would be a red flag for me, because DEIB cannot just be quantitative.
Yeah.
So you want to look for that good balance.
And this is great because you're answering some of the questions that are coming up too, because some of them are asking for recommendations, outside consultants. Some of the organizations, and I would agree with this as well, that lean heavily on ERGs to help create that inclusivity and belonging. And what I would imagine, as a consultant myself, I think the things that are helpful for me to know when someone comes to me is to know what needs to be addressed, know where your pockets and your challenges are, and then be open to a mixed methods type of a qualitative and a quantitative data collection that can actually help the consultant know. You might not know where those pockets are, but the consultant could probably figure it out if they have a little bit more information. So usually a good consultant will ask those questions. They will say, what are things that you're already doing? How much support do your ERGs have? And how much are you actually giving them the time and the resources to do the things that they want to do? And how much are you actually listening to them? That all of those questions are really important. And then, usually a good consultant will also have, a few metrics or not metrics, but like qualitative data that they could actually survey questions, things like that, that once they talk to you, they can actually create something for you, and you can work with them to do that.
Yeah. And I mean, in terms of leaning on ERGs, I have seen that be very productive. But you have to have a good structure there. Most of the ERGs that I've seen be productive, quite frankly, and I know this is a bad word and nobody wants me to say it, but most of the ones that I've seen be productive really function more like unions. And I know that nobody likes that word, but that's kind of the reality. Most of the ERGs that I see don't function like that, though. And I think that that's why most ERGs struggle, because they turn into sort of almost like Facebook groups, or social media groups. And that's fine, but that doesn't really affect change. So I would question sort of what the purpose is.
I'll have another question, but I'll let you continue, and then I'll ask you another round.
Yeah, no, the last point on this slide, I just wanted to touch on, because obviously, diverse employees are going to leave an environment that they feel is hostile. That's always going to be true. But the other big part of it is, I know a lot of organizations, especially smaller organizations, rely heavily on things like referrals. And another issue that we run into with referral systems is people tend to refer folks that are similar to them. That's just sort of how referrals work. It's actually kind of also problematic because you get a lot of homogenous groups that way. But if you're going to use a referral system, that makes it that much more imperative that you have an equitable and inclusive environment where you are getting your diverse populations to refer people to the organization. And if you think about it, there are a lot of organizations out there that, at least from the outside looking in, don't have as many issues with this. And they're not organizations that are putting a focus on their diversity numbers because they have, for the most part, equitable and inclusive environments where people feel like they belong. One of the best examples that I can think of off the top of my head would be like Apple, right? They don't beg diverse populations to come work there. They get people begging to work at, to be let in the door. And it's because they focus so much on what their culture is going to be and how they're going to be able to, I'm not the only one that was thinking that, yeah. It's because they focus on equity and inclusion and belonging. They don't say, I need to hire X number of Y. They try to create a culture where people want to be there and then they want to bring in others like them. And then you've got, there's other organizations, and I don't need to name any because we can all think of one, that are just focusing on that bottom line diversity number. And it then becomes so much harder to get those people in the door because you don't really have anything to keep them there with.
Right.
And people take note of that.
Yeah, there is one question as you go into the next slide. It's the thoughts about when should there be a full-time role to help with maybe with the ERGs, but also some of these organizations that are they're high performers, but they're not having great, they have poor DEI behaviors. And so it says, are organizations addressing these before they have complaints and lawsuits? So
I mean, ideally, right? I think the answer for most organizations is no. Most organizations, especially if you're a larger organizations, are reactive. And I don't think that that's surprising to anyone. I'm sorry, what you said, the first part of what you said was?
The first part was about, they said many organizations lean heavily on the ERGs to help create inclusivity and belonging. What are your thoughts when should this be a full-time role?
Yeah, certainly. Personally, I think that once an organization is of a certain size, that should be, if you're starting to stand up, you've got COO and COO, CEO, this whole C-suite. If you've got a bunch of those positions in your organization, and you're large enough for that to be a need, you probably also need a chief diversity officer or something akin to that. That's another hard one-size-fits-all answer because every organization is going to be a little bit different. My suggestion is always start earlier rather than later because it's easier to build that stuff into a culture than it is to try to fix it on the back end. However, not every organization is going to be able to say, when I hit 1,000 employees, now it's the time. You kind of have to judge it and gauge it yourself. ERGs are not necessarily intended, their ERGs are intended to be run by the employee base. They're not really intended to be run and managed by a diversity and inclusion professional within the organization. Issues that arise from those ERGs would bubble up to that person. But the ERGs really should be run by the employee population. There should be executive sponsorship, but that should not necessarily be your diversity and inclusion person or people, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and someone was asking about cross-pollinating those groups so that those different ERG groups are not just siloed in their own groups, but how do they cross-pollinate to actually, and then take those issues to maybe perhaps the CEO, the chief diversity officer.
I think ERG, they should definitely cross-pollinate. They should be working together. They should be talking to each other. They should be co-hosting events for the organization or even externally. Nobody is a monolith in I don't know if that's the right word, but no group of people is all just one thing, right? Like I am Black and I am a woman, and I could have overlapping identities. I could be in multiple ERGs, which is why it's imperative that your ERGs work together.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. We'll move into the next slide here. So I've got a couple more statistics. I know I saw a couple people were asking where to get these statistics. I don't have the links here. I put where they're from. If you guys want to search, I can try to find them and send out an email for follow-up. But I just wanted to pop these up here and give you guys a second to kind of read through them because I really think that there are some important notes. I'll I'll pull them together and send them over so that we can send them out. But one of the biggest ones that I wanted to point out is the last one that's bottom right. The millennial and Gen Z generations are the most diverse in history. Only 56% of the 87 million millennials in the country are white, as compared to 72% of 76 million members of baby boomer generation. So what that statistic tells us is a very, very clear reality of the future of the United States. So when people are having the conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion and trying to figure out, what do we do? Why does it matter? Do we even need to worry about this right now? It is imperative that organizations get ahead of this. And I don't know about you guys, but watching, TikToks and everything else, the Gen Zs they're not playing. They're not playing. And the generation after them is called Gen Alpha, I learned. But I don't think that they're gonna slow down either, but they're asking these questions. What is your organization doing? How are you guys being equitable? How can you show me before I take this job that this is a place that I want to be? And we know for a fact that the next 25, 30, 40 years, the work population is only going to get more and more diverse. So if we're not on the forefront of trying to figure that out now, there will be businesses that dig their heels in, don't do anything, and go out of business because of this. Maybe not all of them, right? I can't give you a percentage, but it will happen because they're not, following the trend of what's happening in our country. And we're already starting to see where, in past generations, money has been a very clear motivator for people. That's not necessarily the case. And we're starting to see this generally in the millennial generation and after. Money is not enough, right? So I have heard story after story, and I can actually attest to this because I've had the same experience, but I heard a story about a gentleman who was offered a job at a company. I want to say it was in Seattle or somewhere on the West Coast, and it was like $200,000, $300,000 a year. He had the job offer, and he asked them, when he moves there, he's a Black man. He said, when I move there, where can can you tell me where I can go get a haircut? And nobody could answer the question. That was enough for him to turn down that $200,000-$300,000 a year job and take a job paying half that to stay in, I want to say like Florida, because the company that he was working with in Florida showed him that they were diverse and equitable, and that they cared about making sure he had the things that he needed over a haircut. And it doesn't seem like that big a deal, but I moved down here to Austin from Michigan, and I had somebody doing my hair in Michigan, and I have not been able to find anybody in Austin. And I kind of wish I had asked that question. It seems like such a silly thing, but it matters.
It totally matters. Yeah. I mean, I think I was in a webinar the other day, and they were talking about, the salary may not actually be reflective. There might be additional parking that you have to pay for, additional things that you have to know to ask those questions, because if you don't, there might be additional things that are not on your radar that you might have to end up paying for. And so that salary may look one way, but then the culture fit and all those other questions, like what you're saying, are not reflective, and it's not worth that high of a salary.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. There's somebody had a comment, but it's they said,
oh yeah, I see.
You see, okay.
Yeah. It's painful. Hey, listen, there's a reality to everywhere that we live, right? I was on a webinar last year that was about the history of Austin, and they were talking about the gentrification, and I won't get super into it because I'm not an expert on that, but the crux of what they were getting at was Austin is touted as this very diverse, very progressive place to live, but it's really not that diverse. And I don't know that people really recognize that. But I pulled up some numbers, and they're from 2018, so I don't have a clue as to what they look like in 2021. But it's roughly 72%, and this is Austin, not the metro area. This is Austin proper. 72% white, 7.83% black, 7.83% black. Then they had an other category that was 7.77, 7.59% Asian. And then, I mean, like the Native and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander numbers are under 1%. So that's just in the city. That's not even talking about your professional work. And I can tell you, again, from personal experience, you know, when I walk into, or before COVID, when I walked into, you know, various meeting rooms and various professional spaces in Austin, networking and the like, I didn't usually see people that looked like me, right? And so for me, it wasn't necessarily a deal breaker or anything like that, but there are a lot of people that, you know, when we're sitting here and we're talking about, you know, Austin women in tech, what can we do here in Austin? How can we make things better? We can't focus on diversity numbers because where are they going to come from? If every company in Austin is looking for diverse candidates and there's, you know, 30% maybe people here, and we don't even know how, you know, qualified all of that population may or may not be for whatever job you're looking for, and we're all fighting for them.
Right.
What's going to set you apart? So that's why, like I said, it's imperative. It's imperative that we focus on inclusion and equity.
And it sounds like too, and that's making me also think about what is the company's role in the community organizations as well. So what are they doing in their local community to actually do outreach, to actually not only to hire diverse talent, but to also to make their cities better and to make the cities more inclusive. You know, so that, you know, if it's a large enough company, they do have those, you know, if they're touting that they're going out and doing community outreach, well, what exactly are you doing to make our communities more welcoming, so that people do want to move here and that they do actually then will have an opportunity once they come. So I wanted to do a shout out to Digital Empowerment Community of Austin. So.
Yeah, and there's plenty of organizations here. I know the local office here in Austin has reached out to Houston Tillotson, like that's an HBCU that's right here local. There's the LGBTQ council that meets. They're fantastic. You know, organizations have to be proactive in reaching out to these groups and then follow through with partnering with them to try to figure out how to get these. And I'm sure that there's more. Those are just two that I know off the top of my head. But we have to be proactive as organizations in reaching out and building connections with those groups so that we can reach more diverse populations.
Absolutely.
So talking about the performative DEIB, the biggest thing that I want to point out on this slide is actually the quote on the left. And I don't know who said this, but I heard it last year on a Pride panel that I hosted, and it hit me in my heart. And that is, an organizational's budget is its moral document. If you don't take anything else, I hope you got something else out of this, but if you don't take anything else away from this, as an organization, everything that you do is tied to a budget. Everything that matters is tied to a budget. If your organization is not willing to put funding behind diversity, equity, and inclusion at that organization, it's not a priority, period. Not a someday, not a I wish we could do more. Anything that any organization takes as a priority, they put money behind. That is a fact. So some of the ways that we typically see this conversation start with diversity, equity, and inclusion is that people will say, you know, oh, well, we hired a diversity person, so we're good. Well, no. Did you set up a structure so that that person could be successful? Do they have a team under them? Especially if you're a certain sized organization, one person is not going to be able to steer that ship. Somebody in our breakout room earlier talked about the ship being too big to turn, and that always makes me think of the Titanic. But that's exactly it, right? If you put one person in charge of this thing for a huge organization and there's no support behind them, they're not going to be able to really get anything done. You also don't want to focus solely on the racial, ethnic, and gender diversity. Again, when we talk about diversity, that is always the bucket that we fall into. It is either race, ethnicity, or gender. We need to open the conversation up. We need to pay attention to as many of the overlaps as we can, because all of these folks exist, whether that's the LGBT community, the disabled community, neurodiverse populations, generations, et cetera. There's so many overlapping identities that we don't really pay that much attention to. Socioeconomic, yes, socioeconomic is a huge one. You have people will post up job opportunities and they'll say, oh, this is entry level, but we're going to require you to have a bachelor's degree and pay you $15 an hour. Well, okay, but if I went to college to get a degree, I don't want to make $15 an hour, but maybe somebody who doesn't have a degree does, and maybe that would be the thing that allows them to be able to put it out. Like, you can't put up those barriers, and that's where we look at the equitable processes to be able to see if we can make a difference. And then also, again, reducing the DEIB discussion to just strategy and numbers. It has to have both a quantitative and a qualitative set of metrics, because some of what you're going to be tackling isn't something that's going to be easily boiled down to numbers, or you may get it down to numbers and those numbers may not look as good as you wanted them to look, but that doesn't mean that the thing that you're doing isn't still good. So you have to look at it really in a very holistic way. And I know that that's counterintuitive to the way that we do things a lot, especially culturally. In the United States, we are very like, put a problem in front of me, give me these steps, and I will tackle those steps and I'll get it taken care of. This just doesn't exist that way. Mm-hmm. It just doesn't. And the sooner we can wrap our minds around that, the sooner that we can start to dissect it and start to figure out, well, what can we affect and how can we move forward as an organization?
Are you looking at these questions too?
Yeah, I saw some questions come in.
Do you feel like people are mainly looking at quantitative numbers? And if so, how do we change that when it comes to DEIB?
I do. I think that is the default inclination, because mostly in the business world, everything, I mean, data drives the world, right? Mm-hmm. I do think that that's a thing that people are doing. In terms of how to change it, I think the best way to change it is to figure out how to merge the two. Numbers aren't bad. We just can't solely focus on them when we're having this particular discussion. So as an example, if you've pulled together, let's call it demographic numbers for your organization, somebody might pat themselves on the back and say, so like the national average for Black employees is somewhere around like 7%, the last time I looked at it. So technically, if you're at or above 7% Black employees, like, you're killing it, right? Based on the national number. And so it would be easy to say, well, we're at the national number, we're just above the national number, so like, we're fine.
Yeah, box checked.
Right, and then that becomes the problem. You've checked a box because you hit a number. So if you're not also adding in, any other perspective or any other viewpoint, then you're still really failing because it's not a holistic view. So how do we change it? We have to look at it holistically. We have to look beyond just the numbers. It has to be more qualitative.
And someone else asked too, do you see mentoring and coaching programs as an important element in the DEIB budget? And is this type of individual focused work outside the scope of what that budget should be? So like that idea of mentorship and coaching.
I think it should be. Yeah, I don't know how it would even be outside of the scope, to be perfectly honest with you. It has to be a part of it. It has, and it really, mentoring and coaching should be a part of every organization regardless, right? If you're bringing people in the door, if you're not, helping them get to that next level, then I have a whole question about like, what are your leaders even doing and what's going on. So yeah, no, I do think that it's an important part of it. I think in the DEIB conversation, I also tend to prefer to have the conversation about sponsors more than I do about mentorship. And actually mentorship is kind of the entry level. If you're going to have a mentorship program, I think that's great. I think coaching is better. Coaching is more proactive. Coaching is actually what's going to help people get to that next level. The cream of the crop is having a sponsorship situation where and that's something that can function through your ERGs. You have people who are participating, who are being very vocal, who are investing themselves in the organization, and then saying, I see this person is out here trying to do the work. They're doing a great job at their job, but I like what they're saying. Let's, hook them up with, let's call it an executive sponsor to see how we can help that person grow, right? Ultimately, that's the kind of system that you want to try to have in place.
And it seems like too, if I was having this conversation the other day where someone was like, well, even if they're not a part of that ERG group, but if they could be a sponsor for the group, then that's another way of helping to still be an advocate or to be a sponsor, is to, even if it's not, the group that you necessarily belong to, but you do have pockets of power where you can, leverage things. So, that's where our leaders can come in, right?
Yeah, and it's beneficial for leaders to be a part of to be sponsors for ERGs of groups that they're not necessarily a part of. Everybody needs allies, right? That's just a fact. So it doesn't have to be, I am LGBTQ, so the only ERG I can be in is the LG. Like, that doesn't help anyone, really.
We're all many different things. So.
Yes, we are all multidimensional. Absolutely. So, moving on from that slide, I mean, just question and answer that I really wanted to give you guys sort of some food for thought. I know oftentimes people come to these events and it's, people are really looking for, like I said, that's sort of that step-by-step, or like, what tangible things can I do or can my organization do? And the reason that I didn't do that is specifically because it really isn't a one-size-fits-all. Every organization is going to be different. And if I could implore you guys with your organizations, or you all, sorry, to do anything, it would be to encourage your organizations to either, if not hire somebody internally, look to work with an outside consultant, or put together a committee, something, right? It doesn't have to necessarily be something with a large upfront cost. But there are people likely in your organization who want to talk about this and who want to try to figure out a solution. It's perfectly reasonable to say, we don't have budget right now for a full-time hire. We don't have a budget right now for a consultant, but we are willing to spin up an organizational DEI committee. We're looking for 7 people. We're looking for 20 people, whatever, who wants to volunteer. That can be where you start.
Mm-hmm. But it has to go somewhere. Right?
It has to go somewhere. Yes.
I mean, like, you can volunteer all day long, and a lot of times that burden goes on to the more marginalized folks that want to be on those committees, and then they see that it doesn't go anywhere, and they're like, why did I bother doing this? And so there has to be like a promise or something to back up okay, this is how we see what you all do on this committee. This is how we see the impact of what you do on our organization. And this is our promise to you as the leaders of this organization, that we will actually do something with the needs and desires that you've expressed to us that you want to see.
Yeah, that committee should absolutely have structure. It should absolutely have executive sponsorship. If an organization says, we'll create a committee, but we're not willing to put any senior leaders on it, we're not willing to, support it beyond the creation, they're not interested in doing the work. And I wish I could be nicer about that, but that's simply the truth.
Yeah, it's just another metric. It's another box to check.
It is. It's the optics.
We did it, so we're done.
Yeah, please feel free. And yeah, I had to correct myself from saying you guys. I'm really bad at that. I say y'all a lot.
Yeah.
As well. But yeah, any questions or conversations?
Yeah, and also please feel free to unmute and ask questions too.
I can sit here and keep talking.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of any other points, really. I think certainly easy ways. There are some easy ways that you can start to implement a little bit more inclusion. So that would be things like having folks in your organization put their pronouns in their email signatures, in their Zooms or wherever. Starting up book clubs, starting up, movie watching clubs, things like that. There are a lot of little things that you can do, especially if you've got a smaller office, or some satellite offices. Those are sort of small things that you can do. But again, if we're talking about full organizational shift, there needs to be more senior leadership backing. There needs to be some sort of dollar amount put behind, we're going to figure this out now.
I was in something today that it was the HR director started Angela's Hour. And every month it was an hour where she would bring in a speaker. The HR director would bring in a speaker. And I happened to do the one for Women's History Month today. And, you know, and so they said, this is just the starting point. This is just the springboard for more conversation, and normalize these conversations so that it's not an awkward time for people to talk about, you know, any of this, like if it's race or gender or LGBTQI or ability or age or any of these things. It's a way, or socioeconomic, it's a way to normalize the conversations. It's kind of like greasing of the wheels, I guess, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
To say it, but you know, and then we normalize it, and then we want to deepen our knowledge and know more. And so once we start to have those conversations, then we can, you know, say, oh, I'd actually like to learn more about this, and let's talk about the terms that we're using and pronouns and what are those about. And, you know, and people are more apt to ask those questions and to dig into those conversations.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I don't know about the best or even most inclusive pronouns, but certainly I tend to lean on, I do say y'all a lot, usually more in type than verbally. But I will typically stay in like the hello everyone. Folks is a word that I use a lot. I use folk a lot. Everyone, people, humans, you know, in any of those terms are kind of where I stay. Yeah, I've seen some funny ones. I saw somebody was like, just call me Admiral. So I mean, yeah, you don't know, you know, if people are going to have preferences, but I love cheese curds.
Cheese curds, I just saw that.
And toasted raviolis. That's great. Another thing too, oh man, I think it just walked out of my head. Oh no. Another thing too that I wanted to point out is there's a lot of and this comes to just sort of the inclusion and making sure that we're not overlooking certain diverse populations. Somebody once said, I think I heard on the radio or something like that, that the disabled population is the one population where every single one of us is going to be disabled in our lives or dead, right? Like that, like you're either not going to live long enough to be disabled or you are going to be disabled at some point. And that was one of those things that kind of blew my mind, because we really culturally ignore the various disabled populations, which is kind of fascinating considering really all of us are going to be in that population at some point. So it's interesting to actually sit and think about all of the ways, all of the little things that we can do. So one of the things that I brought up even at my own company is we have all of these, 70 something offices around the company, around the continent, I'm sorry. And I wonder how many of those offices, just as an example, have doorknobs when you're coming in. So, like the little round doorknobs instead of the lever, right? And it's not something that somebody who has two hands would really think about ever. But if you have a doorknob and someone literally doesn't have a hand, they can't get in that building. Right. And so it's exposing yourself to these different groups and these different perspectives and lived experiences is so imperative when we're talking about getting to that equitable and inclusive environment, because you can't know what you don't know. Right. So if you're not surrounding yourself, if you're not immersing yourself in the lived experiences of folks who are not like you, there's no way you're going to know how you can best serve them.
And that's where that diversity piece comes in. And, and then that's where you meet all these different people. And I think one of the things too is that something that I've thought about a lot is just because it's not your experience doesn't mean it's not a valid experience. And so when someone comes to you and tells you something about the doorknobs, and maybe that was never on your radar, but to take that, and I think that's that sense of belonging, is to understand that that is a very valid experience and not to dismiss it, and not to make that
Absolutely.
person feel like, oh, well, they're, oh, that's, you're just being sensitive, or, something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I saw there was a question about what do you recommend organizations do to measure success in creating diversity, not simply numbers? So there's a lot of, and again, this is not going to be a one size fits all conversation. It's going to depend a lot on who you all are as an organization. However, one of the things that I've been encouraging in my own organization as an example is figuring out ways. So like I said, we have satellite offices, so we're not all in one building. So it's a little bit harder to measure those things across all of those offices. However, if each individual office says in 2021, we are going to increase the amount of philanthropy that we do as an office. We are going to every single quarter dedicate one of our happy hours, let's say, to going out and doing a philanthropy event. And then instead, and I lean on happy hours just because it's a really easy example, but instead of doing a happy hour, we're all going to go to or attend a seminar together around diversity and inclusion. Those are things where you can show a marked increase and you can still turn that into a data point, but you can also build the story about the qualitative benefit there too. After we as an office did this book club, or after we as an office did this particular event, these are the things that we learned, and here's what we implemented. So for us, we work with a lot of what is the word? Contractors. So if you're able to say as a qualitative metric that, X% of the people in your office have now started introducing themselves to potential contractors by stating what their pronouns are and asking for pronouns in return, right? You still have the data point there, but then you can also start paying attention to, are we seeing any sort of an increase in folks from those communities who want to work with us, right? Are they referring their friends to us? There are creative ways that you can do it. It's going to depend a little bit on the industry that you're in and what you do, but there are a lot of different ways that you can pull in that qualitative.
Yeah, I know Shay is asking that, how does a person respond when you voice how something someone says makes you feel, and they say that you're just being sensitive?
I love that question. And I have a internal, one of our senior leaders said that to me on a leadership training the other week. The thing about that is, I always seek to challenge. So again, I'm a very direct person. This is not going to be something that works for everyone. But in the example that I'm thinking of, we were talking about when folks come in the office and someone comments and goes, "Oh my goodness, I haven't seen you in forever. You look fantastic. Did you lose some weight?" And the senior leader that was in this training was like, "Oh, well, I think that's ridiculous. This person happens to be a man, which is only relevant because of the statement that they made." But the response was, "I think that's ridiculous. If somebody tells me that I've lost weight, I take it as a compliment. Like, I love it. It's a good thing." And I said, okay. However, let's think about it from another perspective. You may have somebody who has dealt with an eating disorder in the past. You may have somebody who is currently dealing with an eating disorder. Maybe the person that you complimented and said, "Hey, you just lost a bunch of weight. You look fantastic," lost that weight because they were doing something that was very unhealthy for them. Mm-hmm. And so now you've commented and you've positively reinforced a negative attitude or a negative habit. And I was like, I'll even go you one further. If somebody could have had weight loss surgery, right? And that's one of those things that we don't really think about either. It's not, maybe they had weight loss surgery, maybe they were 360 pounds in 2014 and they had weight loss surgery and they didn't lose as much weight as they wanted to, and they're still really self-conscious about it. Hi, hello, that's me. and you comment on their weight, now they've gone through all of this stuff based on the one comment that you thought was, so the point being that, if somebody's reaction is, oh, you're just being sensitive, I think the best thing to do is assume, give them the benefit of the doubt, assume that their intent wasn't negative, maybe ask questions, maybe take the time to educate. But the reality is, just because you think someone's being sensitive doesn't, as Joy mentioned earlier, invalidate their lived experience.
Absolutely. And we've got some great things in the comments too. And, my sister had breast cancer and had lost, quite a bit of weight, and someone had said something to her, and, and I've had that said to me as well. And it was more stress induced, or, whatever the reason. And the thing is, I think it happens more, not always, but sometimes with women, because our bodies are already objectified. We're already, our bodies are already, meant to be commented upon, because society has said that that's okay. And,
Right.
And so when that starts to come into the workplace, and for that man, I would say that he probably didn't realize that there's a variety of all these experiences that's not on your radar, but that doesn't mean that you can't be mindful of those things. And,
Right.
And that's one of the pieces of that too. I had someone, Shay, to comment about that. Someone called, I've been called forceful, dramatic. I've been called all kinds of stuff. But when this person said, well, you women were being so dramatic. And I said, you might not actually know that word dramatic is quite triggering for a lot of people, because women have been put into mental institutions and have been burned at the stake for as far back as we can remember, and being called hysterical. And so the words that you say matter. And he goes, oh, I didn't know that. And I go, well, now you know.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, exactly.
So.
Yeah, we're getting lots of conversation in here.
We've hit something.
The question that I saw, and I did see
How
your
do
initial...
we convince leaders? Is that it? How do we convince leaders to not hire for speed, but hire for diversity? Recruiters have so many metrics and time to fill. Is constantly a top priority for leadership. Are there suggestions?
Yeah, that's stuff that's going to be a little bit slower to turn around. So big picture, the diversity inclusion conversation, when we're measuring the success of diversity and inclusion initiatives in an organization, we're not talking about months. We're talking about 3, 5, 7, 15-year benchmarks. So I said that to say that's going to be an uphill battle, especially in a position like recruiting, because the reality of that world is, and really every world is, every business exists to make money. For-profit, nonprofit, doesn't matter. If you're not making any money, then you're not in business. So yes, you are going to have that speed element that is going to matter. Convincing leaders, I wish I had a better answer for it. It's really about changing the culture of the organization, right? I mean, there are organizations that don't just, throw people at the wall, for lack of a better word, that take the time, executive search, et cetera. They're able to do that. That may not be the business model for the organization that you work for. So there's some realities to it. I think the best thing to do is to continue to infuse that equitable, inclusive conversation into not only your organization, but also the clients that you support. Hey, Mr. or Mrs. Manager, I hear what you're saying about, this being a quick turnaround, but I want to find you the best candidate. You've mentioned that you're having a little bit of issue with diversity on your team. I'd really like to solve that problem for you, but it's going to take me a little bit more time. Can I have that time?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that answer is yes. Oftentimes it's going to be no.
And I also think it's it's an embodiment too, right? It's not just tools and strategies of how to have a more inclusive culture and a sense of belonging, but it's this embodiment of how do we move through the world every day, with every move, with every action, every thought, is what really changes that barge. Any other questions? I think we have about 10 more minutes. So if we have any other questions, or
And I love someone's daughter just says, stop looking at me. I'm telling you, these younger generations are not playing. I love it.
Oh, my daughter has a zine. We got a whole bunch of zines, Destroy the Patriarchy zines. There's all kinds. She's working on one right now. Yeah, it's they're not messing around.
Wild. It's wild.
You know,
I love it.
Yeah, and I also teach university, and so I told them last night after our conversation about I said, you know, you all are going to be teaching the alpha. Y'all are Gen Z because they're about, 19, 20. And they said, oh, that's yeah. I said, I've had to change my culture and equity advocacy class because you all have been you're way past this idea of what implicit bias is. Now y'all are really like, let's look at equity frameworks. How do we actually change the system? How do we transform the entire thing? How do we turn it on its head? And I was like, y'all are keeping me up on my toes too, because it's not your mama's diversity class anymore.
It's not. And that's too why, like I said, I think so many organizations and really just so many people in general are trying to put the cart before the horse. Because they want to know, what is the solution? How do I fix this? What can I implement at my organization? When the reality is, as an organization and really as individuals, most of us don't understand the history of behind what it is that we're trying to fix, right? So most of this stuff, when you're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, is rooted in history. It's rooted in the oppression of all of these various groups. And that's uncomfortable. People don't like to talk about that. And that makes sense. I get that. But it's imperative, right? So I actually was on a call the other day where somebody said, there is a book club thing and they were trying to dissect it. The book was very, very hefty. And they were like, well, let's not focus on the history right now. Let's talk about the stuff as it's relevant to today. And I was like, hold on, hold up. You can't do that. I was like, you are literally incapable of doing that, because if you don't understand the history, you cannot have a conversation about what's happening today. And that's the reality. And so that's where, when I'm doing my consulting in my side gig and having these conversations, even internally at Apex, that's a lot of my conversation is, hold up. I hear that we want to solve these problems, but as an example, with the last year that we've had in the conversations around, the Black community, et cetera, I can't tell you how to fix 400 plus years of systemic racism. That's not a question that I'm capable of answering, right? And same is true for all of these other marginalized groups. Exactly. I'm using one specific example, but exactly, it's not, for all of these different groups, I can't tell you how to fix, hundreds of thousands of years potentially of oppression. But, specific to America, let's call it 400, years or so. That's not something that we're here to do as an organization. What we can do is understand the history, how that history is affecting us in the present, and then create a plan to move forward. And that's the ideology that you have to walk into this with. Because if you don't, then we're still having the same affirmative action conversation that we've been having for 60 years. And that's not gotten us anywhere.
And I think if you don't know the history, then you don't understand why we are where we are.
Exactly.
You have to know that history. And history it tells us so much about the present day. So this is wonderful. Thank you, Tai.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate you guys being here and sharing all of your content with us. And great job to everyone who attended and sending their questions in. We really appreciate all of your participation. So I think we're going to have our program come to a conclusion at this point, and move into our next section, which is who is looking and who is hiring. So at this time, please feel free to unmute yourself and let us know if you are in the job market or if you're looking to hire someone, and maybe why it's great to work at your company. Feel free to throw that through the chat as well. And when you do share, throw it through the chat right after. All of this will be going out on our recap email. So that will include the video recording of tonight's event, any of the resources that Tai and Joy mentioned while they were speaking this evening, and then the entirety of the chat will go out as well, so that if anyone needs to get in touch with anyone, they can.
Hi, this is Heather from BB Imaging. Can I just make an announcement that we're looking for Director of Engineering immediately on the tech team to lead our team of software development engineers? Can't tell you enough how amazing BB Imaging is. I love being a part of a team. I can talk to you all day about our culture, but we're hiring immediately. So I will put my contact information in chat. And if you want to know anybody or have any referrals or you yourself, I'll be happy to continue the conversation. So thank you, everybody.
Anyone else want to share?
I'll go. So my name is Angela, and I just moved recently from Los Angeles because of the pandemic back to my hometown here in Brownsville, Texas. I'm currently doing freelance product design work, and so I'm looking for full-time and contract opportunities and other freelance opportunities. So if you know any positions, please hit me up. I'll put my information in the chat.
And I wanted to mention also, I know we spoke about this at the beginning because where I work is sponsoring, but we are a technical recruiting staffing firm. Also, Heather Trunkfeller works at Tech Systems, which also is the same thing. There is Cheryl Miller, who does as well. Please feel free to reach out to any of us. We have job postings for all over Austin, and I know that Heather's company as well will have them all over the US. So if you are looking, please feel free to reach out to any of us. Okay, since we're a little quiet now, people can continue to put your stuff through the chat, but I'm going to hand it over to Taryn, who's going to do our membership announcement. Or do we have Boss Ladies coming up next?
Yeah, it's our Boss Lady time.
Boss Ladies, go ahead. Emmy, do you want to do Boss Ladies?
Sure, Denise, can you share your screen? Dina Sanders, welcome to the Boss Ladies Club.
Thank you so much.
Dina is nominated because she's been a longtime member. She's been a speaker for us. And if you were a part of last month's Galentine's, she attended the most events in 2020. So that has earned her a Boss Lady status. So I will get you your t-shirt and your swag soon.
All right, thank you.
All right, I guess it's to Taryn now.
Welcome, Dina.
Thank you guys. Yeah, so as the membership director for AWT, I just wanted to give a big shout out to our Girls High tonight. Really happy that we got to learn a little bit more and get ourselves further educated within DEIB, and ultimately just have further conversations about this. It's definitely something that I don't think a lot of us tend to get engaged too much on internally. So glad that AWT was able to represent that tonight. As far as membership, I wanted to let you guys know, we would love to have those that join tonight that maybe are just non-members. And if you are looking to become a member, I would set my information obviously is right here in the chat. But once a month, we do host events like this for members and non-members alike, including intelligent conversations, networking events, happy hours, fundraisers for Girls Start and Dress for Success, tech talks. And then obviously we have some expos and conferences virtually coming up as well. But as an AWT member, you receive free events right now to all the events throughout the year and utilizing our Slack channel for further networking and postings of jobs. So obviously seeing some of these jobs coming through, sounds like there's obviously a lot to post. It's definitely a job seeker market. So hopefully we'll be able to kind of have another way of utilizing that to get your jobs posted out there. And then just as far as cost, for just a year, it's $60 for a member. And then, but for students, we have it for $30 a year. So again, if you have any questions or want to learn more about AWT's for future events or anything just in general, I'm happy to connect with you further, and you can email me as well as call me anytime. I will put my information in the chat as well.
I also want to point out one new thing that we just recently launched. Thank you, Denise, for helping us with this. We have a resource area now available on our website that's only available to members, and it includes all of the Zoom recordings from all of our past events. So if you missed last October's event, which was awesome, if you missed our financial planning, which I think was last September, that was awesome. They're all in that resource area, and you're going to get your $60 worth out of the year just from that one link on the website.
Taryn, actually, Denise, do you want to do the volunteer opportunities?
I can do it, Shay.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, we have some volunteer opportunities here, and you can reach out to volunteer@AWT Austin. That will reach Lacey Michelle, and we have these specific program positions open with the bullet points. And then we're also starting to recruit for our 2021 to 2022 board. And Heather is our president-elect, and she will be leading that program. So please reach out to her at Heather@AWT Austin, and she can explore with you what opportunities we have available and what might be the best fit for you. All right. Shay, I think it's back to you now. Oh, you're muted, Shay.
Thanks. We have our next event coming up in April. It's going to be April 27th from 5:30 to 7:30. And it is going to be on overcoming intimidation and communicating effectively in a male-dominated environment with our own Nicole Pletka, who has been a member for a very long time with AWT, and we are so excited to have her speak. And then I'll pass it back to you, Emmy, for closing remarks.
Yeah, this tonight has been like, I was on the committee that helped organize this, and so I knew tonight was going to be amazing, and it was even more amazing than I anticipated. So when I kept repeating super excited earlier, I really meant it, and I hope that it lived up to more than what I wanted. I learned so much. This has just been a fantastic event. Thank you very much, Tai. Thank you very much for Apex for letting us have Tai and for sponsoring this event. It's been absolutely fantastic. Thank you to Joy for moderating tonight and all of the wonderful volunteer work that you're doing for us. And I hope you guys got out as much out of tonight as I did. All right, anything else?
Thank you all for having me. Enjoyed being here.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday evening, and we'll see you back here April 27th.
Thanks, bye.
Thank you.